Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Ask the Experts webinar for March 19th, 2019. We took a week off last week. I was exhausted, so were the potential guests. But we're back this week. We are actually heading into week 4, and that's halfway through our week season, and we have 4 events down and I guess 6 plus the provincial championships to go. Please feel free to ask any questions at any time by typing them in the question box. We have a plan that we're going to go through, but if the plan gets changed based on the questions that are asked, we're more than happy to deal with that as well. So we are recording this, so if you're listening to us live, that's great. If not, hopefully you're listening to us on the YouTube, our First Canada YouTube channel. We'll upload this video as soon as I convert it to an MP4 tonight, and then I'll send it out to everybody who has previously signed up for the webinar. So hopefully that works for you, and hopefully you'll enjoy this. I think this one is heavily anticipated because we have with us Brennan Bibic from Team 4476, the Waffles. And if you didn't know, the Waffles are currently in first place overall in the province. They've played their 2 events, and of course not everybody's played, but they were finalists in an event, and then in their second event they were the champions amongst other awards that they might have won, which has been pretty spectacular. So Brennan Bibic is eminently qualified to talk about scouting. In fact, in my position in the swag booth at Georgian College, I had a chance to see the top of his head as he was sitting on the floor across from the table, and I could hear him discussing a little bit with some teammates and some other teams about plans and scouting and strategy. So he'll be a great guest, I'm sure. And Brennan has a tremendous history in first, which we're going to welcome Brennan in now, and he's going to chat about it a little bit. So welcome, Brennan.
Hey, thank you. So yeah, I'm the lead mentor of 4476. Been with the team since its inception in 2013, but have been doing FRC since 2009 and have been involved in the scouting process heavily since 2009. So it's been, I guess this is 11 years now, 11th year of being involved in the scouting process and what makes it good.
Wow, I wish I could remember 11 years ago what I was doing, but I still didn't have hair back then, but it's another story. Anyways, we're going to get started. So I guess it's a little bit of a moot point since we're doing a whole webinar about it, but is scouting important, Brennan?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So scouting has sort of 2 main purposes. The main one that most people think about are when you're picking alliances or when you're picking your partners for eliminations. So getting information about who your potential partners are, who's on the field, who you could pick is really valuable because then you'll know, what robots are complementary to yours, who you might work well with, who scores a lot of points, that kind of thing. The kind of other part of scouting that's useful is just for regular matches or during eliminations when you want to know what your opponents are doing as well and come up with strategies based on, things that you can observe on the field. So knowing how much they score, how they score, strengths and weaknesses of different robots, that kind of thing. Very useful.
So it can make a big difference to, if a coach is asking, can it make a difference to my team? It can make a difference throughout the entire competition, not just at the end. Is that right?
Absolutely. Scouting is one of the things that I like to tell my team is, scouting is probably the biggest impact that you can have. Your scouting team is the biggest impact that can happen at that event because it's kind of hard to make drastic robot changes or improve your robot. But one thing that you can do really easily is change how you're playing the game. And, when you scout, you know what your partners are capable of doing, and then that makes your performance do the best with what you have with the robot, and then win more matches than you would say, quote unquote, be expected to win.
That's a good tip for sure. So, having talked about scouting a little bit, how does your team scout effectively? What do you do?
Right. So the majority of scouting teams and systems have at least 6 people scouting at all times, and those 6 people directly kind of watch one robot on the field, since there are 6 robots on the field at a time. And what they do is they record a whole bunch of different information about what the robots are doing, largely where they're scoring and what they're scoring. So, for the example, in this year's game, you have hatch panels and you have cargo. Those are the 2 main scoring objects. So you'd be marking down how many game pieces they score, for example, in the cargo ship, or on what level of the rocket ship. And then obviously the other aspects that you could score, you also want to be probably recording, which are like where do they start for Sandstorm, because that kind of matters for lining up sometimes and how much points you get. And then where you end off, so the climbing aspect, what level they end off with, and measuring that. So 6 people normally take care of that aspect. And then you kind of compile the data, the information that you get from the matches that you watch, and then kind of put it into one centralized sort of system where you can easily reference it, get an idea of, team 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever, and see what their, numbers or statistics are.
Do you ever see a team do something, or a scout see a team do something in a game, and you're not clear why they're doing it? Do you ever go and ask them, like, what happened? Why did you do what you did?
Yeah, less so with strategic decisions, but definitely with robot issues. Sometimes you'll see a team that is struggling. Maybe they're having a hard time driving around, or their arm just stopped working halfway through the match, or whatever. Some aspect of their robot kind of broke down. We do regularly talk to those teams after that match and just kind of be like, "Hey, how's it going? What kind of issue was? We noticed that X issue was happening. Could you give us some more context to why that was happening, or whether or not that'll be fixable, that kind of thing." And that we do that so that we know, sometimes teams will not know why that issue is happening. So that's something that we want to know, is whether or not they know how to fix it, and whether or not they're going to be likely to be running fully. And hopefully they are, but sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't, and that gives us information as well.
Have you ever offered to help them fix their problem, or say, I think this is what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. Pretty much every event we go to, actually, we have people in other people's pits, checking over things, making sure that they're good. One of the things that we were doing just this past weekend at Georgian a lot was there were some disconnection issues. So we had a lot of people, going over all the wiring and making sure that the robots were connected up, and sort of like a control system advisor role, helping out the teams, making sure that they're good to go for their next few matches.
Right. So if you're a rookie and you're listening to this, and there are 8 rookies competing at York this weekend and 4 at Waterloo, that's not unusual. What Brendan is describing is it's not just the Waffles that does this. I know at York this weekend there'll be Team 1360, who won that event last year, and they were in the position that Brennan's team finds themselves right now, which is first place overall in the province, number 1 out of 173. And they're dedicated to helping other teams. There's already a couple of teams I've mentioned to them that have asked for a little bit of help, and they're going to be there to help them. So don't wait for the Brennan Bibics of the world to come up and ask you for help. Approach them. They'll be happy to do it.
Absolutely.
So you got 6 people watching. You got 6. Are some of them, are they all students, or are some of them adults?
it kind of depends on the team. We're a small team, so some rookies may find themselves in that same kind of scenario. And to kind of combat that, we also have our parents scout for us. In order to do that, we do just like a quick training session before our event, just to kind of go over everything on the sheet. We use paper scouting, so what we do is we have this sheet that basically has a whole bunch of different boxes that you can use to mark, where they scored game pieces and when. So just going over that with everybody who is going to the event helps a lot. And then, like I said, we have probably mostly students, but then when the students need a break, we have some of the parents step in.
So if you're using 6 scouts, what happens when your team plays? Do you scout your own team?
Absolutely. So scouting your own team is a super valuable thing to do. The main reason is you know how you stack up compared to the other teams at your event. Very often you will remember either like the really good or the really bad of your matches or whatever. It's hard to gauge your own performance without actually objectively measuring it. And if you're, scouting your numbers and counting them all up and looking at averages, max and min, then you kind of can compare your numbers to the other teams that are at the event, and you will know, oh, we're about as good as this team, and when you're playing up against them, you'll know which matches are hard or which ones are slightly easier.
Mm-hmm. So when you're preparing your scouting sheet and you're talking to your scouts, what are you looking for? Are you looking at just objective things like how many patches, how many balls, cargo or rocket? Or do you look at subjective things like driver skill level, strategy, things like that, decision making?
Yeah, so one of the big problems that some teams have, in my opinion at least, is they try to take on too much for scouting, and they try to get too much information. And what ends up happening is when you don't have the people, like things that are really obvious, that are clear, how many balls do they score, how many hatches do they score, that is a little bit easier to train for. Things that are like driver skill or what kind of strategy did they use, those are not easily teachable skills. So we generally don't scout them formally, at least. We kind of have people who are super involved in knowing how to play the game, make notes about that, but we don't do that for every single team, every single match. So we keep it to kind of the bare minimum, just numbers, counting things, and then a little bit of kind of a note section at the end, just in case something happens. Note sections are really useful when you're doing scouting for a multitude of reasons. One of the biggest reasons is, if a robot gets defended or like can't score, or maybe they break down, it's really nice to be able to note that down for that specific match. That way, when you look at their numbers, and you see that maybe they scored a lot less game pieces this one match, you can look at the comments, and then hopefully you'll have a comment that would be like, oh, they were blocked out by defense, or they tipped over, or their arm broke, or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've talked about in the stands and talking to teams when they come off the field or in the pits, but I know the Waffles travel during the build season to go to practice fields.
Yep.
And obviously there are other robots there. I have been pushing and pushing and pushing that I think it's a tremendous advantage for Ontario teams that there are so many practice fields that teams should take advantage of that. Not everybody does. Is there scouting done there? Like, do you know what teams are capable of because you've seen them on a practice field or you've practiced with them?
Yeah, there's definitely some sort of informal scouting. We go every year to Crescent School 610, and we hang out there, do some like practice matches, kind of unofficially, and then you really get a good feel for what all the robots are capable of doing because you're there for a few days and the robot's on the field for more than a normal competition. So you get a good feel for at least the teams that are moving early and that are going to those practice sessions for sure.
And as I mentioned, it's a huge advantage that Ontario has. I've been at meetings in the States last year in Orlando in June, and to hear people talking in their states that the first time they practice their autonomous is at a match, just
Yeah,
shows what a huge advantage it can be.
for sure.
So if I'm a rookie team, and you probably don't remember when you were a rookie team, it was so many years ago. Um, you were so young. I wish I was young when that happened. But how do you make your team attractive to teams like the Waffles if your team is not likely to be a picker? So, and typically that's rookies, although we have had some phenomenal rookie performances this year and in past years.
Yeah, so I guess there are a few key things you want to be doing. Number one is you want to kind of be a team player when you're in your qualification matches. One of the biggest things that will, really catch somebody's eye is that you're easy to work with, that you are willing to kind of play whatever roles needed, especially when you're not the alliance captain and you're looking to be picked. You're kind of looking to fill their kind of needs. When you're forming alliances, generally you want to build around the alliance captain, since the alliance captain is deciding, and then they'll choose robots that kind of complement them. So one of the really obvious examples this year is, there are some robots that are really good at the cargo balls, and there's some robots that are really good at the hatches. Some are really good at both, but there's a lot of robots that kind of fit into one or the other. So, if your robot's really good at hatches, focusing on that and looking to be a partner for a cargo robot would be something that you can do. So, working well with them, doing what you need to do. The other thing is one of the big things, especially for third picks or second picks, third robots, is defense ability. So actually, both of our events, our last selection was picked almost exclusively just because of their defense. So being able to block out other robots successfully that are really good at scoring and not getting penalties is something that we really look for.
So let's say we're at York University and there's 8 rookies. There's a good chance that if you're a rookie, you're going to be in an alliance during the qualification matches with 2 other rookies.
Yes.
And you might be the best robot in that group. Would it make sense, if you know, like, I think we're going to lose, we might not get any ranking points, to do some defense just to show that you can do it?
I would advise against that for kind of 2 reasons, I guess. So sometimes when you're with a alliance partner, they may be looking to seed, and even if you think that we have no chance of winning, it's, you want to be the team player, and you don't want to be, you want to come together as a qualification alliance on one specific plan. I mean, obviously you can bring up the fact that you'd like to be playing defense, but ultimately what you want to be doing in qualification matches is trying to play the best you can to win, to have the best chance to win, even if it's not your preferred strategy. We have scenarios like that too, where, for us at least, as an alliance captain who has a little bit stronger robot than some teams, when we run into a team that, really wants to try out a mechanism that's not working that well, or wants to do something that isn't going to help us win the match, in our opinion at least. It does cause a little bit of friction, and we do notice that.
Hmm.
So yeah, my recommendation is almost always go do whatever you think is going to win the match most
Hmm.
likely,
Okay.
and kind of agree as an alliance.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. So, and it happens every year. What if everything goes your way? You're a first or second year team, and your robot is solid. It has no problems. It's running well every match, and the matches are set up randomly, as if you don't know that they are, and you do really, really well, but you haven't done much scouting, and all of a sudden you're a picker, and with a few matches left you're going to be a picker. Um, do you have any advice?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things you can do is you can talk to some of the experienced teams, possibly even some of the other teams that are also in the top 8, because you know that they're going to likely have a list. You ask them for some scouting information, especially as a rookie team. Teams are very willing to give you their recorded data for scouting, and then you can use their numbers that they've recorded and have their comments to try and put together a list. Yeah, and in general, you want to be doing scouting even if you're a rookie team to some
Right.
degree. You don't even if you don't have those 6 people or you don't have that time, even just making notes about every single team, like having a blank, like just a blank uh, book and like 1 page per team and just writing notes about that team, like, oh, they scored 5 balls this match or whatever, just bullet points, or they play really good defense.
Hmm.
Even just having notes will help you out a lot with making a list.
Sounds good. So now you've got all your data. It's the night before the night after the first series of qualification matches. You've got a few more qualification matches in the morning, and then you have to quickly pick or be picked. What happens with all that data?
Right. So, like I mentioned, most teams have some sort of database that they put it in. Lots of teams use Excel. Some people use Access databases. Some people there's a Tableau, which it's probably a little bit late to get into right now, but something that you can look at into that's free for all FRC teams. Tableau sponsors, and they're kind of a visual program that represents data. And what you do is you put all that into a database, and then you look at it as visually as possible, make it into numbers that make more sense. So not just they scored 10 pieces in match 1, 3 pieces in match 2, looking at averages, looking at what was their maximum performance, what was their minimum, that kind of thing. And then we look at all those numbers and then kind of compare those numbers between all the other teams at the event.
Now, in your scouting meeting, and I'll tell you, even when I had a team, that was not something that I wanted to get involved with. How do you run the meeting? Is every member of the Waffles in it? Does everybody get a chance to speak? Do the scouts speak first? How does it work?
Yeah, so for us personally, the way that we've found works the best for us, at least, we have our entire team attend the meeting for the first 20 or so minutes. We all eat dinner together. We talk about fun things that happened during the day, or crazy things, or stressful things, or whatever. And the reason why we do that at the beginning is because when you really get into looking at the numbers, you don't want to be distracted by, funny story A when a robot tipped over, or stressful thing about, when we lost that match. Getting that out of the way helps. So after that, we have the drive team and the pit crew go to bed because they have to be up early, and we just have the scouts stay at the end. And the reason why we do that is, the scouts are the people who are watching the matches, and normally your drive team and pit crew are not really watching matches. They're fixing the robot or driving it or talking to other teams and doing strategy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Normally we have at least one drive team member stay. Normally it's the coach. That way they can just be like, oh yeah, we really enjoyed working with Team X. Team Y we didn't work very well. So having that kind of information is also useful.
So I guess the third question there, what I meant to say with when I wrote that one is, how long do these meetings go on for?
Yeah, it depends on how well you're organized and the event. If you're in a really tricky situation, especially like where there's a lot of close teams, it can be hard to decide which robot you prefer. The Waffles generally try to keep our meetings 2 to 3 hours length. There are teams that go longer, but I think that once you get to that point, you start to not be as productive, and people staying up late is not a good thing. So we try to keep them, 2 to 3 hours long, and whenever there's that much of we have a person who makes the final call if there's any really close battles of like who do we want above Team X or Team Y. When it just gets too long, we make that final call with one person making that final call if it's close. And one of the reasons why we're okay with doing that is our pick list evolves a lot even after that night. We look a lot at the last day of competition. Even though we don't have a scouting meeting, we have a few people, the kind of key scouting people, constantly adjusting the list slightly. So if you notice a team, they had a really good match, they just fixed their mechanism and now they're doing great. We're really looking for, that kind of improvement, especially if we're in a scenario where we're a low seed and need to try and do something crazy to try and upset a higher seed.
Mm-hmm. Which I think might have happened at Durham.
Yes.
So I guess you touched on that, which is you had a plan that evolved that you had in place at the end of the evening, and then in the morning it could have evolved. So in the end, it's just a plan and it could change.
Absolutely.
So just the last few kind of points, what tips just some tips, what should you not do when picking? You're standing out there, getting ready to pick.
Yeah. So, the biggest one is make sure you have a list. Make sure you know your person who's out there is aware of the possibility that you might be a picking robot. Even if you're not in the top 8, if there's what we call intra-picking, like if one picks 2 and you're 9th, you could be bumped up to the 8th position, and then you'd be picking. So always be prepared with a list if you're gonna be, decently high seeded.
I've seen people out there with phones. Do you use a phone with your list on, or do you have it on paper?
So for us personally, we have a paper list with the person on the field, and then we have transitioned to a phone to make the final call. We have basically just a representative that knows enough about the robots and can advocate for ourselves on the field, and then the main scouters all kind of group together off the field and kind of talk about different scenarios and different strategies and different teams we could pick. And then when we're actually coming up to a pick, we'll text the person and let them know our thoughts, and then they either advocate or make the pick for us.
Right. So prior to the actual getting on the field and getting a microphone from Karthik in your face, do you ever go on the practice field and sort of audition robots, especially if you're in one of the top 2 spots to pick?
Yeah, that's something that happens very often. Yes, one example, like last year, there were several teams that were kind of showing off their autonomous modes because one of the high seeds was looking for a specific autonomous. So, being able to show that you can do something on the practice field is really valuable. That's one thing that we actually look at all the time on Waffles is we always have a person watching the practice field, especially the last day of competition because people are working on things or they
Mm-hmm.
might bring out something new. So, coming up, like booking a practice field session and talking to, and telling other teams that you're looking to be picked by to come over and take a look at your robot and see how it's doing is one of those kind of strategies to get picked. Perhaps just letting them know, hey, we have this new autonomous, or hey, or come look at our climber that's working now on the practice field. That's one of the ways so you can possibly get picked.
That sounds great. Now, of course, this is meant to be fun. Everybody should be having a great time. There's stress at times, but it's exciting for sure. Nothing's life and death. And first is supposed to be about fun. Any funny stories that have happened with the waffles? Like people throwing waffles out of the stands or anything like
We haven't had anything crazy happen with the waffles per se. We do have a mentor that, funnily enough, one of our old strategies was we would hold up a whiteboard. Some teams still do this, just to say what team they would want to pick. And one of our mentors, when he was on a different team, mixed up the order of two numbers. There were of two teams that were very close, and ended up actually picking up the wrong one that they wrote, which was kind of amusing, and we still bug him about it to this day. But yeah.
Yeah, I'd be worried about that. I would be worried about being out there and picking a team that wasn't actually at the event.
Yes, that happens too.
So it's a good idea to make sure that you know what you're going to do. Now, in all of this today, we've had some great information. I'm sure part of the when you're at your meetings deciding your thing, one of the things that you talk about is to buy more swag or to do the first Canada student survey and to win a prize from that. But obviously, that's like a appetizer before the big part of the meeting, which is deciding who you're going to pick. But you've laid out some great strategies, and hopefully it's clarified a lot of things for a lot of people. But if you're on the webinar tonight and you have any questions for Brennan, please chime in, and we'd love to hear what you might want to ask. But yeah, it's been a fantastic webinar. I appreciate you. I know you've been tired from the trip back to Kingston from Georgian, because God knows I was tired just going down the road to Newmarket. But okay, here we go. How come the first seed sometimes picks a lower seed, not just number 2?
Yeah. So it kind of, well, there's a few different reasons, I guess. One of the big things about this year's game is, as we've seen through the competitions that have happened so far, climbing matters a lot when you're seeding, right? Because if you can get that third level climb and then just one robot to park, you get a whole ranking point, which means that there are a lot of teams that can climb very well that are seeding high, but they might not necessarily be that great at scoring game pieces compared to some of the lower teams. So what ends up happening is, your number 1 seed probably has a climber already, so they don't really need one. So kind of going back to what I was talking about, you want to create an alliance that's, filling your gaps or your holes. You don't need 2 level 3s. Some robots can do 2 robots up there at a time, but usually you don't. So they're looking for robots that score a lot of game pieces usually. So that might be one of the reasons. Another reason that might happen is, you might have a team that is seeded really high that played with a whole bunch of good teams that can score really well, but they themselves are maybe not quite as good as the top level teams, but they had an easier match schedule. So that's another reason why you might see a higher seed picking a lower one.
Mm-hmm. So maybe I glossed over this, but when we were talking about scouting from the stands or in the practice field or um, in the practice fields that you might have at Crescent or wherever, how much scouting is done in the pits? And if you're scouting, what kind of questions are you asking? Who are you talking to?
Yeah. So this is one of my bigger pet peeves. A lot of teams do a lot of pit scouting. And what pit scouting is basically you go and talk to other teams with kind of pre-populated questions about their robot to get to know some more information about them. In general, I find that for us at least, the questions that are asked or that we could ask are not very useful to do on a broad, as broadly as that is. Like some of the common questions are like, how many wheels does your robot have, or how fast are you geared, or
Mm-hmm.
can you pick up X game piece? In general, the reason why we don't like those kinds of questions is because they're not particularly pertinent to what makes a robot successful.
Mm-hmm.
We can see whether or not they're able to pick up game pieces because just with the quality the on the field scouting by just looking if they can score game pieces. And drivetrain or drive
Right.
wheels, we don't normally care that much about. We just care about how many game pieces you're scoring and whether or not
Right.
you can deal with defense. Now,
Mm-hmm.
there are some scenarios where you might actually care about it. Some robots, maybe they have, they lift another robot up to the level 3 platform, or we saw a ramp robot at Georgian.
Right.
Uh, that is a different scenario because you really want to know if they can get up your ramp, what teams can and what teams can't. So that might be a scenario where you really want to do some pit scouting and ask them some in-depth questions about like what kind of wheels do you have, what's your drivetrain frame size, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for the average team, those numbers don't really, or the information that you get from that is not super useful.
So we have another question here from a young lady named Julie from BC. She wonders, in what circumstances would an alliance captain turn down an invitation to join a higher ranked alliance? For example, is seventh alliance captain better than joining a third or fourth alliance?
Right. So we actually had a scenario like this at Durham, where we really wanted a specific defense robot, and there were some other teams that were ahead of us that were about as good as what we could pick from the seventh alliance. So we would have declined everybody above us that wasn't those three or below. Just so that we could make sure that we had a better chance at getting a specific robot on the way back up. Another reason why you might decline is, maybe, like I said, maybe a robot ahead of you is just not that compatible with you. Maybe you
Mm-hmm.
both have level 3
Right.
climbs and
Just
they're
more
not that
room.
good at
Yeah.
scoring, and there's just other picks that you'd rather be with. So that's another kind of thing that you might do.
So back in the day when I used to coach a lot of basketball, I would often really emphasize when someone made a pass for someone else to score a basket and celebrate the pass, even though we were obviously celebrating the basket as well. So how do you make scouts feel important, as it often feels like the drive team and pit crew are the preferred roles or the celebrated roles?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that our team, and specifically me, really emphasize the importance of the scouting. Uh, you know, you can't win events without scouting reliably. Like, you can maybe be the third robot and get lucky perhaps, but if you really want to be a really successful team and go far in eliminations, or seed high, scouting is the thing that you need to do, and making sure that that's super clear to the people on your team is something that's really important. One of the other things that we do is not everybody can just scout on our team. And a lot of teams, they kind of just say, you don't have any other job. Don't worry about it. You're a scout now.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then that doesn't really, the people who are on the scouting team, they don't have this kind of pride of like, yeah, I made the scouting team,
Mm-hmm.
like a driver or the pit crew may have. So we have like our six main scouts, and then everybody else is kind of just like a backup or filler, or what we call our topping crew. So waffle toppings. They kind of fill in the gaps when they need to be. So if there's a issue with the robot, or we need someone to do scouting, that's kind of their role. So making sure that scouting isn't just a role for anybody, and that there's specific training and a level of expertise that's expected from them, just like any other key role, is a big part of it.
Mm-hmm. Geez, I'm getting hungry now with all this talk of waffles and toppings.
Yeah.
So the Waffles have had a spectacular season so far. Um, and I want to thank you again, Brendan, for coming on tonight. It's been great. I'm sure we're going to get, this might be the all-time high in terms of when we post it, how many people watch it and rewatch it. But what are you going to be watching this weekend?
Well, one of the big things is Waterloo. There's a big number of teams that are playing for the first time that we know have been competitive, for many years previous. So expecting good things from them. I'll also be at York doing some game announcing, so I'll be watching that too. So should be really fun and interesting to see all these, especially new teams that are playing for the first time in week 4.
Well, like I said, thanks again, and thanks to everybody who's listening. And remember, this webinar is going to be uploaded to the First Canada YouTube channel. I'll put the link on the First Canada Facebook page, and for everybody that's signed up previously to a webinar, I will send out the link through email as well later on tonight. So thank you, Brennan, and thank you to everybody that joined us tonight, and good night.